Hey everybody, welcome to Author Talk. I'm Sarah Donovan, and we are talking to the authors who have generously contributed to Just YA, and this is our paperback version, which you can get anywhere books are sold, but most importantly, it is available as an open education resource at oklahomastate.com, and the link is in the comment section below where you can access it for free as a teacher and a student and download it and make copies and everything so that you can spread the Just YA love to everybody. And today we are really grateful and happy to have Samuel Stinson here to talk about his poem. Samuel, welcome. Will you introduce yourself?
Hello, Sarah, and thank you, everybody. So, my name is Samuel Stinson. I teach English at Minot State University. We've lived here in North Dakota for about 5 years, a little longer than that now, actually. But we've raised our two young boys out in North Dakota, and so the the poem that I contributed to the collection is somewhat connected to my kids and playing with them outside and just the general nature of play. And I'm sure we'll talk about that momentarily. But that said, we've really enjoyed our time living up here in North Dakota, and it's had an influence profoundly in the sorts of things that I'm interested in thinking about and writing about, not just in terms of scholarship, but also in terms of creative works like poetry. So in 2022, this fellow editor and I came out with Embodied Risk, which is a collection written for Routledge. It's a textbook. So we've been doing writing such as that. Um, and so, in addition to more technically oriented works, I really do appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this collection and also to speak to ways that we can use poetry to better understand language and the way we learn.
Wonderful. And have you always written poetry? Have you always seen yourself as a writer?
So, I started writing poetry when I was a teenager. I started really my great interest in reading the books of the writer R.A. Salvatore, Bob Salvatore, who writes novels in the D&D universe, Dungeons and Dragons. And I started reading more of his works and the works of Douglas Adams, the writer of somewhat sardonic and funny, very, very funny books, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I've always liked works with a sense of humor and also works that really got us to critically think about language and the way it's used. So that really got me thinking about writing creatively, both fiction and poetry when I was younger. And it's something that I've done, although not a great deal professionally. In my professional life, I've done more in terms of technical professional writing, academic writing, but I've always kept a place in my heart and in my writing and my purpose and my own personal self. In terms of the writing that I like to do is always going to be creative and fiction and poetry.
Wonderful. How did you find your way to learn about the Just YA call for work for writing? Do you remember?
That's really difficult. I think I might have seen a CFP for it online, a call for papers or a call for responses. And I saw that and I thought, well, this sounds like an excellent guide with respect to teaching, using fiction, using poetry, using essays, especially for the age group and demographic. I thought, wouldn't it be great? But as I'm sure there's such a dearth of material when it comes to teaching these things as topics to young people. And that idea of inspiring young people by having examples and working with examples, I think could really be a benefit, as I'm sure is happening now with the publication of this collection.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I'm so glad that you did find us or that we found each other and that your poem is in this collection. We're really grateful for that. Well, will you read it for us?
I'd be glad to.
Okay.
So my contribution is called North Dakota Snow Angels. Take me out there. Take me out there when it is 15 below, and we are wearing 5 layers of warm flannel. And outside, show me the northern lights. Point out the North Star. Point to the silent winter stars, that blue sky that darkens so late in summer, that dark sky now, that now beams down with that bright curtain light. Take me out there now. Take me out now to the snowbank, away from the blowing drifts, to the fresh 3 feet of untouched snow, to the spot where we lie, brushing our arms up and around with white wings.
Mhm. Samuel, I wonder what stands out for you as you're rereading this aloud for us here.
I think I inserted the word with in one of the lines. I think it's so easy to do when you're reading your own poetry to say, if I had included an additional word there, what would it have been? I caught myself and I said, oh, I'm not going to stop reading it, but I'm going to note that to myself. So I think I added something additional just in the mechanics of the reading. But I never thought about pacing. And you might have seen this before when you hear a poet speak, there's always a different cadence when the poet who wrote the piece reads something. Then when we as the reader read it, right, we might have our own cadence in our mind and the starts and the stops and the stammers that we might have. Uh, as the poet, it's a lot different because I say, well, this is how I kind of thought of it. And as the reader, we always create that new space around the poem. So I'm very much interested to hear how the readers read it, especially since this is a poem where there's not a lot of punctuation, right? Um, Not a lot of spacing, not a lot of commas. There's an M dash and there's a comma, there's several commas, but aside from that, it's very much open in terms of how it could be read. So I'm very much interested to hear how others have read it when they read it out loud. And that's another thing too. Poetry is always right meant to be read out loud and not just to be read internally. But our modern culture, we like to just read things silently with a book or silently with a laptop or an ebook. But it's great when it can be shared, whatever the work, and to be able to hear it and hear other people read it. So it's always a treat to be able to share that experience with others.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think when for a number of reasons, I loved it when we first read it in our the group of teachers and students who read all poems and pieces that were submitted and sort of to create this anthology. Love this poem for a number of reasons, and I think well, first, what strikes me, and I think it's like lovely to think about this with students that we're reading it with, or when they're writing their own poem, is who is the speaker? Like who's asking to be taken out? Take me out there. Point out the North Star. Like who is that asking? And who is the implied recipient of the question? Who is the one who has the power to answer this? And maybe they're the same voice. Maybe they're the same person, right? Or the same being. Like take me out there, and maybe talking to themselves and like I had the capacity to take myself out there, right? Um, and then another way of saying, who are you asking to join you? Which is another lovely way of thinking about the poem. For me, when I'm reading it, is like, who do you want to go? And who is the we here? Like in the last line, to the spot where we lie, brushing our arms up and around. Like how beautiful is to think about that as an invitation, an asking to be alongside another person and to do this um, moving the arms up and down with white wings or whatever it is, whatever else it is that we invite someone to do. And so I immediately go to the next step as a teacher and say, let's write a poem about this. Who do you want to join you? And what do you want to do together? And you don't have to name who that is, especially in high school. It doesn't, it could be someone that you are sweet on. It could be a best friend, and it could be your pup, or your canine friend or feline friend. But what a lovely prompt to say, who do you want to go with and what do you want to do? And it really sounds here like a joyful place to go, and also being in North Dakota and thinking about what your geography, what your place in the world allows you to do that doesn't. Like we're in Oklahoma, and just a couple weeks ago, it finally rained, right? It had been dry and hot and in 90s and 100s degrees. And then we had a tornado, right? So like there's something different about being in Oklahoma and what this poem would look like here versus in North Dakota. So I've been talking for a little bit about how I'm just imagining um, the beauty of your poem being used in the hearts and minds of other people. What else kind of stands out to you?
Well, I think that when I wrote this particular poem, I gave myself a challenge. I thought, what can I do in terms of composing something, first of all, with the sound of the words themselves? So you might notice that I reuse a lot of the same words in some of the lines. So the first, take me out there, take me out, and then later, take me out there, take me out now. And I noticed what was like, well, that's interesting. If I were to include this, take me out, where am I being taken to? Who's going with me? It's some of the same questions I think that you're drawing on here. And I thought if I were to repeat something else, I said, well, I'm going to say, take me out, and what, and what. And I think that was the pattern that I started this with. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could use some of the same language in terms of the cadence and the repetition and say, well, what kind of flows next? What kind of comes next? And I thought, well, I think it's probably something, whatever the person is feeling, or what are they thinking, or what are they looking at? And I was trying to bring in some of the sensory information there and the visual. And I thought, well, the thing that comes out most fervently is the Northern Star and the lights in the sky the further you get away from the city. And in North Dakota, as this poem started to take shape, I thought, well, this is really about going outside in the winter, isn't it? And I was really discovering that in terms of the composing. Up in North Dakota, we get -40 is the low, usually during the winter with the wind chill. And when we moved here, we had to get special coats and equipment. There's specialty stores that sell this. And I remember them saying, well, remember, this is the really high-tech gear. You don't need that, not in North Dakota. I said, well, where would you use that? The higher, more is like something warmer than -40 that I need for something warm, colder than -40. They said, oh, yeah, Antarctica. You'd need that if you go south to the South Pole. I thought, where am I going? What's going on here? It was a little bit of a shock. We'd spent some time in Ohio for our program 5 years out there. So we had gone through a few winters. So when we got here, they said, so how hard have the winters been where you came from? I said, oh, reasonably comfortable during Ohio. And they said, well, you're in for a treat. And then 2019, when we got here, it was starting September 15th, somebody said, well, remember in August, remember in a month, you're going to get blizzards. So don't be surprised. So every 2 weeks, like clockwork, we got blizzard upon blizzard upon blizzard. And we were certainly glad we had gone and gotten the equipment, the -40
Yeah.
equipment. So the idea of going outside, there was this comment also that was made during one of our school sessions with the K-12 teachers, and they said, "Well, remember we have a setting where even though it gets cold, we still let the kids go outside, and we only let it get to -15 before we stop recess. So as long as they're bundled up, -15 is fine." And I'm thinking, -15? My poor kiddos are going to freeze out there, but they were fine. And the gear they had, they were fine. Of course, they're running, they're moving, they're pumping their arms, they're running around, so they're staying in a good zone out there. So that idea of play and playfulness, not just with the language, but with the thoughts of what's it like to be out there in winter? And the first question I have is, what am I doing out here? I got to get inside. And I thought, well, what if a person wanted to stay out there? And I really think it's interesting that you bring out this question of identity. Who is the person speaking? Who are they speaking to? Especially because I think good poetry really draws on that question of inviting the reader in and like that invitation saying, let's do something, you and I, the author and the reader. And let's just for a moment, let's play a different role. Maybe I'm not the author. Maybe I'm asking the same question as the reader. And with that in mind, good poems are really those that draw on really good questions. And they make us respond in a way that seems like, oh, well, this seems so obvious until it doesn't.
Uh-huh.
And that's the sort of model that I really like when I'm thinking through poems and those that I like to read also. They really help me to see something different or think about something different.
Yeah, well, you certainly do that here, and there's layers to reading. Like you can read it a lot of different ways, and there's different invitations for writing. And I even love this idea of a prompt about a place that you want to play or a place that you just want to go experience that might be unexpected. So you don't want to go outside during the tornado, but maybe there's like a moment that's still safe to do so that you can be blown in the wind a little bit, Um, and how again how different places in the country will offer different invitations for play, outside, which I love. Well, Samuel, I wonder, I know you're doing academic work and probably looking for places to do some more poetry. What all are you working on now? What's kind of taking up your creative and um, writing life here?
So I've got two strands that I'm investigating at the moment. So one of them is the purely technical. Again, there's this technical creative split in my mind, it seems like. The technical side is interested. So my dissertation work was called Writing with Video Games. It was exploring the algorithms and the systems for organizing play in structures in those types of gamic rhetorics. And it was about 7 years ago. And I've been asked by a company to revisit that and see about getting that ready for publication. But of course, within 7 years, things change quite a bit, not only with the scholarship and the thought, but ideas for expanding this work, saying, well, what if I were to make this more about now? What's going on now in terms of publishing and discourse? And of course, generative artificial intelligence, that seems to be a
Of
big thing.
course.
And that seems to be something that video games on one hand and Gen AI seem to have in common, which is that shared structure of let's engage with this and let's interact with this and see what happens. Video games do that quite frequently, right? Video games do nothing, as James G said. James G said, video games do nothing unless we do something with them.
Mm.
So we're participating in that play as much as the games are. And Gen AI is a very similar track too, where Gen AI, it can talk to itself perhaps, but the real great conversations, the really engaging ones are those in which we can have that harmony with the AI, and it can prompt us as well as us prompting it. So that mutual reciprocity of prompting is very engaging, very game-like also. So my goal is to try to investigate some of those current and ongoing conversations about AI and connect those with the rhetoric of video games and play and say, how can we better fill that space also pedagogically in terms of thinking these ideas through? So that's my next big question in terms of the technical discussion. And I also teach co-located courses with the National Writing Project, the Northern Plains Writing Project, of which I co-direct here in Minot, North Dakota, a course specifically on memoir and memoir writing. And it's something that, interestingly enough, although I draw from the personal in terms of my own writing occasionally through poetry, I've not really committed anything to writing in terms of memoir or memoir writing, which is somewhat ironic given that I have such an interest in this. I thought, well, at some point I need to make a small contribution to the discussion. So in times past, I'd mentioned that I also have a podcast, which is here at Minot State University. It's called the MSU Lookout. So if you're interested in that, you can find that on Google with MSU Lookout with my name. And I like the sound of other people's voices a lot more than mine, but I like to work with projects also in terms of sound and in composing of sound. So that's another aspect. And for years, I've worked with a group called LibriVox, L-I-B-R. Did I spell it right? Librivox, I think, is it LibriVox? And we've done some audiobook recordings. So if you're interested in contributing to that, they're always looking for new readers to go on. If you have a microphone or some type of device, even something with a phone with a mic in it, you can contribute and read books that are in the public domain. And if you're looking for books in the public domain, you can hear other people's works, other people's poetry. It's a great resource as well. So I have to plug that in terms of my discussion, but also because it's also in my continuing projects.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you did. I think this is like one of the joys that I've been having of doing the interviews where we learn, we're gathering other resources for writing and reading and just like nurturing our whole life and our interests. And I think students also see that the poets, living poets and living authors who contributed to this are living human beings, have a wide range of interests. And I'm sure that there's some of our students listening right now who are like, I didn't know that like writing and video games was a thing, or that there was this website that I could do that, or I could like get paid to, read audiobooks. Like these are all things. These are all things, right, that are really important. And I love that we get to learn more with our authors here. So thank you so much for that. Is there any other sort of message that you have for the teachers or students reading Just YA this year that you'd like to kind of close our time with?
I'd like to express, of course, gratitude to you and to the others who put this collection together. Thank you again for this opportunity. And thank you for the teachers who are considering this as a resource and using it. And the students as well, especially, this is for you. And we very much appreciate your input and your thoughts. And if you do have feedback or thoughts on my writing or my work, I'd be glad to receive that also. And again, my faculty profile is out there. If you'd like to look it up and send me an email, I'll be overjoyed to hear from you. And thank you again for your interest in the work and the writing that we all do.
Thank you so much, Samuel.